Hey guys, how is everyone tonight on this lovely Tuesday evening? You guys are lucky enough to put up with me for the next 20-30 minutes while I go through a few questions tonight. I've got a few sent in, got about 8 or 9 sent in so far. Guys, so with tonight's just a general Q&A where I can answer some of your questions. I'm getting a lot of questions on similar stuff as well, which I wanted to bring up a couple of them myself. Obviously, it's a common theme in the marketplace with a few questions I'm regularly getting. And so tonight, guys, like normal, if you have any questions, pop them into the comments and I'm going to be able to answer them for you. If we get a few too many questions, I, of course, will have to cut it off at a certain point. But please, guys, I'll answer any question you've got. Just remember, anything I answer for you is general in nature, okay? So just keep that in mind. I'm not one to give any sort of property advice over Zoom. Alrighty, guys, so before we get started, I'll just let a couple more people pop on tonight. But basically, I've got a few questions people have emailed through to me. I've got 2, 4, 6, I've got about 8 questions from that. I've got a couple of questions I've got myself, mainly because of the common thing that's been happening. A common question that's been asked to me in the last month or two. But feel free to say hi, put some questions in, and let's get rocking. So, first question. The first question is, what's the difference between registered land and unregistered land? Quite simple. Registered land is basically titled with its own deposited plan number or SP number that you can build on straight away. So the roads are in, all the services are ready to go, and you can sort of see it, touch it, feel it. You can step out the boundary, whatever you want to call it. It's basically land that's ready to build on straight away. Now, unregistered land could be many different things. So unregistered land could be land that's halfway through being developed or constructed, or it could just be an acreage with trees on it too. So sometimes with our clients, when we do what we call, I suppose the best way I call it is when we're crossing over property purchases. So one property's finishing, they may have already bought land to start another property when this first one's finished. What we do in that scenario is we buy unregistered land because it's not ready to build on. You're getting it for a better price in most cases. So what you can do is you can start the process on your next investment property on that unregistered land. And the benefit with unregistered land is you don't pay for it until it's registered. So you can have unregistered land for a year, 2 years, whatever it might be, and you don't pay for that land until basically you can take ownership, which is perfect. You may or may not have to pay a 10% or 5% deposit. In some states, you have to pay stamp duty after 3 months, but all that's part of property investment, guys, especially if you're looking at putting and being more assertive or aggressive in your portfolio. Unregistered land sometimes is a good way to do that. We do that quite regularly here, and what we call crossing over the property investment. So that's the difference between registered and unregistered land. The next one is, a lot of questions I get are around stamp duty. So this is a good question a guy sent in where they've asked, with the stamp duty, explain to me the difference between a building and buying a finished product. So we're not talking about depreciation. Now, I do talk a lot about depreciation and how important that is to have as part of your portfolio. But through the buying process, when you're buying a house and land sort of structure, it could be a dual key sort of house and land as well. If you buy a finished product or a single, or what we call a single contract, means you don't pay anything till the property is ready. You will pay stamp duty on that full purchase price. So say, for example, if we went into, say, New South Wales, I think I worked it out on New South Wales, yep. If you bought a finished product, brand new, it doesn't even have to be brand new, to be honest, a $600,000 home, you're going to pay around about $22,300 stamp duty on that property, right? But if you do what we call a split contract, so a split contract is when you have one contract for the land and one contract for the building, you only pay stamp duty on the land portion. So this example here, you might have a land value of $270,000 and a building or construction contract for $330,000 to get to that same comparable $600,000 value, you're only going to pay stamp duty of around $7,800. So you're actually saving it's pretty close to $15,000 in stamp duty. Now, as everybody knows, a stamp duty is a state tax, and it's definitely a tax. So if we can eliminate as much tax as possible through any sort of investing, that's the best option right along. So that is, in some scenarios, or in a lot of scenarios, buying land and building is a big saver. Where I suppose you could get around that a little bit is if you were a first home buyer. Of course, that's not, obviously you can't initially outright buy the property as an investment to get all the benefits, but stamp duty, you won't pay any up to a certain figure. I think it's $750 at the moment, which is fine. I don't do a ton with first home buyers. So that's one there. So don't forget, guys, pop questions into the comments if you have any. Don't be shy. Okay, the next one is, how big does a block have to be to subdivide? Now, that's a tricky question. So depending on what the zoning is, and depending on your local council, depending on your suburb, state, etc., all that comes into it. But let's give an example. If you guys may or may not remember, some months ago, I went through all different websites I use to do with planning. And for New South Wales, the one I use on a regular basis is the New South Wales Planning Portal. You just Google New South Wales Planning Portal, you put your street address in for the property, and that'll tell you the minimum land size for that suburb. So a rule of thumb, you would probably say, if you've just got a normal residential home area, if you work on 500 square meters being the smallest block, so you need to say 1,000 square meter block to cut it in half or whatever it might be. That's normally the rule of thumb. But say, for example, Lake Macquarie Council, where I live, any sort of subdivision there, you can go as low as 450 in most areas, which is perfect to get that 450 square meters. A lot of people don't know that. So a lot of the properties that are hedging on the 900 square meters, that they don't realize they can subdivide. But on top of that as well, if you've got which is something I do talk about a lot of people don't understand it, but boundary realignment is where you might buy a whole 1 meter off the neighbor. So if you've got, I don't know, a block of land that's 870 square meters with a 35 meter boundary, and you buy a whole meter off the neighbor, so you're just buying 35 square meters, that's it. You're in a position where you bumped over the 900 square meters, so you can subdivide it. Now that 35 square meters might not have cost you much. Obviously the block of land that you purchase with a house, old house, whatever it might be on it, that is also, you bought at a better price because you haven't bought it with the development potential. So subdivision is a great thing to get into. Boundary realignment is also something I really love as well. But just go to the New South Wales Planning Portal or the Planning Portal in your state, and they can normally give you a rough idea, an approximate idea of what the minimum square meters are. There's many different things that come into it though, guys. Just remember that if it's already got a house on it, you've got to take into consideration where the house is sitting. Are you taking away a garage? Because most subdivisions, you've got to have a car space or carport of some type as well. So there's many different factors to do that. And it could be an easement. You might have a sewer easement go right through the backyard. So of course you can't really build over that unless you get council approval, and it's probably going to slow everything down. You want quick and easy ones. Okay. This one's been asked a lot, actually. This is one of my own questions. So it's a question that's been commonly asked to me the last couple of months is NDIS homes, do we recommend them? So for those of you who don't know what an NDIS home is, it's a disability, it's a purpose-built disability property under the SEP council regulation, which means some of them don't have garages. Normally there's a lot more big open space within the property itself. And a lot of companies out there do offer really good leaseback scenarios. The only thing I don't offer them, just so we know. I don't really look after them or go and hunt for them for properties. The main reason being they're a specialist market, and you can't really rely on the government to be there for you the whole way with backing certain leases, etc. So I'm one to say, okay, that market's a little bit limited for me. I'm not one to recommend that. I'm not one to have that one myself. But under the NDIS, it is a good return on investment. But if something goes pear-shaped with that, you're left with a property that the only market you can sell to is a disabled market or an investor who wants to rent to a disabled tenant. Now that's all fine, but that's a very limited market. So I'm not one to sort of promote that. And also certain banks, a lot of banks, you could possibly say, don't lend money on NDIS property. So that's another problem you've got as well. Okay, the next one we've got here is, yeah, should I get a building inspection on a brand new property? So I don't, in most cases, I'll be honest. I don't get a building inspection, but the best rule of thumb is what I work off. If I attend a final inspection with a client and the property's perfect, everything's working, no leaks in the water, etc., you don't really need a building inspection at that point. You have a 3-month warranty on the build on maintenance issues, 3 or 6 months, depending on the builder. And of course, you've got a 6 or 7 year building warranty as well. Now, for me, that's enough to cover me if anything was to go wrong. But if you're walking through the property and you can see some obvious things that you're not sure about, that's when I would get a building inspection done. Is if I just had a few questions around the property itself, whether I think there's a few things wrong here, the building might not be where it should be, the building, there's a few cracks that shouldn't be there yet, or whatever it might be. I don't really come across that with the network of builders we use, but you really have to be careful with that as well, just in case there is some underlying factors. Now, if you do go out and get a building inspection, you have to take into consideration that building inspector, you've paid $300, $500, $600 to do this building inspection for you. They're going to come back with something. Even if they have nothing, they're going to come back with something, and that's okay. All you have to do is, and what I always recommend to people is, have a good read of it. If you're stressed about some of the items in the building inspection, give the building inspector a call and just say, hey, is this a real big problem? Is it worth it? Is it not? Because sometimes I feel, and this is no offense to building inspectors whatsoever, is that they just need to fill in their report. So they're going to add some stuff in there, whether they need it or not. All right, guys. So next one we got there is, okay, Wayne, you speak of a buffer in your investment account. How much should I have as a buffer? So for those of you who don't know what a buffer is cash. And at the end of the day, it's liquid cash in your investment account, where what you'll probably have is your investment account. You'll have rent going in. You'll have your repayments coming out if you've got repayments. Now, that what we call buffer is basically a balance. So the balance in an account is what I call zero. I work off about $5,000 approximately, depending on whether it's a cash positive property or maybe a cash negative property. If you worked on, say, $5,000 as a rule of thumb, that is your zero balance. That's your buffer. So 5,000 per property. So if you had 10 properties, yes, I would probably consider having a $50,000 buffer. That's probably going extreme if your portfolio is structured correctly. But as I said, that's just a bit of a general sort of overview of that. Now, with that buffer, that will also dictate, from my perspective, on how cash positive the properties are. I've had clients who have had buffers in place and the whole portfolio is cash positive, and it just keeps growing and growing and growing by itself. So the main thing there is make sure that buffer account, whether it's $5,000, $10,000 or $50,000, is utilized as an offset facility against at least one of your loans. It frustrates me, or that a lot of people have, in some cases, have 50 grand in their offset facility, in the bank account, and there's no offset facility. Why give the bank your money for free? We want to make sure we get a return on all your money on a consistent basis. I'm a big believer that cash in the bank is a bit of a waste of money. I do believe you should be investing on a regular basis with your money, but you've got to have your buffers, and you've got to make sure your buffer is also working for you. All right, guys. All right. Okay, so next question up here is, I'm worried about what would happen to my portfolio if I lost my job. How does this work? Okay, so that would, of course, depend on your portfolio and how you put it together. If you've structured it correct, and for those of you who watched last week's, we used the steadfast method, where you've got a cash positive property and potentially a cash negative property side by side. If you have your buffers and you have the steadfast method, if you lost your job, obviously everyone, you're not going to lose your job forever. You are going to be out there trying to get a new one. But realistically, if your investment structure is put together correctly, it shouldn't matter. All right, it shouldn't matter, because you want to make sure you not only just have a buffer in your investment account, you want to make sure you have a redraw in your home loan. You want to make sure you have a bit of savings offset against your home loan if you still have one as well, so that in the event you did lose your job for a month or 2 months, you're not under a lot of financial stress. Your worst case scenario as well, you can pause payments for a period of time if you did lose your job. I don't recommend that unless you really, really have to. But losing your job isn't the end of the world. Sometimes it's a breath of fresh air, guys, to be honest, to start from scratch. So a lot of people stress about losing their job, and I'll be honest with you, job security in the 21st century, it's not there really. It doesn't matter if you've got a contract. It doesn't matter if you have a good, solid, long-term job. You can be made redundant tomorrow. You can get your contract cancelled tomorrow. So you want to make sure when you're investing, you do prepare. You have a little bit of a worst-case scenario plan in the event that something with your job did go wrong. Alrighty, guys. Any other questions? Come on, guys. We've got to put some more in here as well. Okay, so this is another question. This is actually a question from a client, but it's a regular question I'm getting asked. Is now a good time to sell my properties? Now, how do I say it? You should only sell a property if it's for a reason. So that's just my belief. Sure, a lot of the property markets are going quite well at the moment, depending on where your properties are. And do I believe the property market's peaked a bit in some areas? Like, I'm not sure. I think it's slowing down as far as inquiries do a little bit, but that can be just because it's getting colder. People get a bit more lazy on the weekend. I'm not sure. But if you have a position where your property has done quite well and the market's quite strong around your property, yeah, I would sell the property if it was going to make a difference to your personal scenario. That's just me. But just remember, plan to sell. You got to be careful of capital gains tax. Make sure you speak to an accountant before you sell your property to make sure what the capital gains tax event could lead in relation to potential taxes. And as far as any real estate agents that you want to employ, please do not just go straight away to the person who might be doing the property management on your property. Make sure they're a good agent. Make sure they've sold some properties in the last 12 months. Make sure they've had some good reviews. Rate my agent. If everyone's got a pen or pencil, feel free to write down Rate My Agent. That's a good area where you can go and see what what agents are good in your area. And it's not always the one managing your property, because if you remember, the one managing your property is the one that is a property manager. It's not the sales guy or girl. It's the property manager. So please do your research. And the best way of doing that is, if I contact a real estate agent to potentially sell my property, I would see who calls me back as the quickest and follows me up, because they're going to do that to your potential buyers as well. Alrighty. Okay, I've got another question here. Is how much cash or equity do you need to start a development? Okay, that's a pretty open-ended question, but let's just say a duplex or a triple X or something along those lines. From a lending perspective, now, most lenders for development, now there you've got your public sector and then you've got your private sector. Now, me personally, I prefer the private sector, even though it's more expensive. It's a lot easier to get your construction loan or development loan approved. But what they want to see normally is a minimum 40% deposit. They don't like cross-securitizing. They want to make sure their equity is kept separate. So sometimes you may have to go into your own equity, borrow some money, and then pay outright for the potential land, and then they'll build and they'll give you the construction loan. But what they will want to know as well is feasibility. There's a lot more involved than just the actual financial side of it. But that is a good rule of thumb, is if you had enough cash in the bank to pay for the land outright, you would normally get a construction loan for development finance relatively easily. If everything stacks up as far as a resale, what you paid and the construction cost of the property and how much of a margin you have in there. And of course, always add in 5%, a contingency plan of 5%. That'll make sure anything that blows out won't blow out too far as well. And definitely do your research on the builder. All right, I think I've got a question here. So this one's from Scott. If you buy a property off the plan and it doesn't register straight away and you hold paying stamp duty until it settles, how much extra will you pay? Scott, it depends. I actually can't recall exactly what the interest rate is with the office state revenue. But if your stamp duty, say 8,000 and the Office of State Revenue is 10% interest rate, for example, you're going to pay another $800, I guess. That's if you've held paying stamp duty off for 12 months as well. So on one, when I buy off the plan in New South Wales, just to get everyone on the same sort of track here, you normally will have to pay stamp duty after 3 months of exchanging contracts. So if your stamp duty on your land was $8,000, you would obviously have to pay it in 3 months. Now, on one that doesn't normally pay that, I'll just let that go until settlement, depending on the period to settle, and I'll just pay the interest that the Office of State Revenue charges. But I think it's 10 to 12% off, roughly off memory, because that is actually also what do you call it? A capital gains tax deduction as well for you. All right. So Ben, he's got. Hey Ben, how are you? Hey Scott. Sorry, I've got to say hi before. Ben, can you tell us a bit about depreciation when investing in property? So, guys, with depreciation, if you've missed the last couple of depreciation videos I've done, depreciation is what we call a non-cash deduction. So if your property has depreciation, which, as I've said a few times recently, where if your property itself is secondhand, or you didn't buy it brand new as an investor, the depreciation is nowhere near as good. And with a depreciation, it's what we call a non-cash deduction. So if you have, say, $10,000 to $14,000 worth of tax deductions, that's just on paper. That goes straight off the rent or straight off your taxable income if that's what happens. So if it was to come off your taxable income and it was $14,000 and you're on the highest rate, that's almost $7,000 worth of a tax rebate you would get. Now, a lot of people say to me, Wayne, I can go out tomorrow, buy an older home and spend $14,000 on it to get the deductions the same as the depreciation. But I just got to remind everyone, if you were to do that, you have to make sure it's actually repairs, and you're going to physically outlay $14,000. So if you had $14,000 in the bank, you're going to pour all that $14,000 into that secondhand property before you can claim the deduction of $6,500 or $7,000. Where a brand new property, you're not putting $14,000 in. It's just a paper deduction on the depreciation schedule from the quantity surveyor. Alrighty, guys. But that was a good question, though, Ben and Scott, actually. Alrighty, guys. Now, I don't have any more questions at the moment. So do we have any other questions? How long are we going for at the moment? So we've been going about 20 minutes. I don't like my live to go too much longer because people get a bit bored. But does anyone have a quick question before we go? Because next week I'm going to be talking about the common fears of first-time in property investors. I'm coming up a lot lately on, obviously we get a lot of first-time investors here at the Property Bloke, and there's a common theme about at the moment with what probably the top 4 or 5 fears before people invest. So what I'm going to do is next week, I'm going to list the top 5, and I'm basically going to break down how you go about eliminating the fear, or I suppose having a calculated risk. Alrighty, guys. Any questions any more questions in there before I go? Oh, yep. Sorry as well. Just popped in the 15-minute link. So if you have a specific question to your portfolio, you can just click the link. They're booking with me for a 15-minute chat, and I'll give you a quick call for 15 minutes and go through your issue and see how we go from there. All right. Oh, I've got a couple more questions. Great. So Steve, hey Steve, how are you, mate? So you've got, how many homes can you have in a personal name? So Steve, you're not limited at all to have any amount of names in any amount of properties in your personal name. What may or may not limit your personal name will be how and when you're investing. So just for long-term brand new style investing, there's unlimited amount in your personal name, but of course you're going to have to be careful of land tax in each state, and also the banks lending your money as well. If you're going into flipping houses or short-term strategies, you may not want to buy in your personal name. You may want to put it under a company or a trust or something along those lines. But there's no limit made at all, not at all. How long before a contract may cease if say land doesn't not register in time. Okay, so Scott, these are a thing called a sunset clause in every contract when you're buying land off the plan. So with the sunset clause, there's a certain date. Say, for example, what are we now? We're May. You might have a sunset clause for December 2021. So in the event that December 2021 comes around, the land's nowhere near finished, they would normally have a bit of an extension contingency plan of 3 or 6 months after that. But worst case, if they didn't, at the end of December, you can walk away and get your deposit back. Because actually, just I might add on to that, mainly because of weather and or council can delay that as well. If it's the developer's finances, you will know pretty quick, but normally it's weather that can delay construction of land subdivisions, and also council can come in and be a pain in the ass. That's what they're there for, of course. Alrighty, guys. Any other questions before we go? So next week, just a reminder, next week we are putting together the top 5 fears of first-time property investors and how to basically get around your fear or answer the fear in your own mindset. Because the only reason why people don't invest in property, if they can, if the bank will lend them, it's their mindset. It's the fear of doing it, all these things that can go wrong. They get a bit overwhelmed by what can go wrong rather than what can go right. So next week, I'm going to break it down for you on what can go right rather than what can go wrong. Alrighty, guys. But thanks for watching tonight, guys. It looks like that's about it for questions tonight. Feel free to reach out, add more questions in here if you need. So if you're watching this not live, if you're watching this tonight, later, or the next day, or whatever it might be, feel free to pop questions in. You can actually pop questions in the group itself. Don't be afraid to do that either, and I will answer them for you. And yeah, guys, thanks again for watching tonight. I look forward to next Tuesday. And yeah, have a great one. I'm Wayne Jessup, the property bloke, giving real strategies with real property to get real results. I look forward to chatting to you next week.